Hello, I would like to give you an outline of the terminology we're going to be using in this section. This will give you a framework for understanding what we'll be talking about when we talk about risk and uncertainty. So I'm going to make some distinctions and introduce terminology. Sometimes I even slip up when I'm using these terms, and they're especially confusing because of the way we tend to use them in everyday language. Okay, so what is risk in our context? And when I mean our context, I'm talking about an engineering context. What is risk in our context? Okay, so something is risky, we call it risky, if you have probabilistic knowledge about a harmful outcome. So if you take a risk, there is some chance that a harm will come to you, okay? In our context, we're adding here that you have probabilistic knowledge of the harmful outcome. So for example, I just looked these things up quickly online. The risk of, the risk of when you take a polio vaccine of severe allergic reaction and possible death is 1 in 1 million. The chance of the odds of dying in a vehicle crash across someone's lifetime is 1 in 100. I checked that. That's a really quick internet search, and that hopefully is not right. That's kind of scary. But yeah, that's what came up really quickly. And then the odds of death by playing Russian roulette is 1 in 6. So even though thinking about Russian roulette is morbid, it's a good way to frame these discussions, to just put the probabilities in terms of you just would change the number of bullets and the number of chambers. So if the chance is 1 in 1 million, you'd have 1 million chambers in your gun. And in Russian roulette, 1 in 6. So you have a 1 in 6 chance of dying in that game. Okay, so in all these cases, there is some statistical knowledge about facing a harmful outcome and what that harmful outcome would be. Okay, so this is just very general stuff about rationality and risk. In general, we think that it's rational to accept a risk if the benefits outweigh the chances of harm. So polio is such an awful disease that it is and the chances of being harmed by the vaccine are so minor that it is very rational to get the polio vaccine. But it's not rational to play Russian roulette because the chances of death are high and you don't really get anything out of it. So there's a cost-benefit calculation going on, and performing cost benefits is very complicated if you've taken other courses in this, but this is just very general. You have the chances of a harmful outcome with risk, and then you decide to take that risk if you think that the benefits outweigh the chances of harm. So, here's a good example. So in pregnancy, doctors tell pregnant women to eat salad and plenty of fresh vegetables, but not to clean out cat litter boxes, okay? Even though the risk of harm from cleaning out a cat litter box is way less. So the risk of fetal blindness from or death from the toxins in the cat feces or urine or whatever in the litter box is a much smaller chance than the harm facing a pregnant woman from the bacteria ingested that would be on a salad. Okay, so many more women would get sick. So the risk is higher. But the benefits of eating fresh fruits and vegetables are very high, right? But you don't get any benefits from cleaning out the cat litter box. So it's easy to say, have someone else do that, right? But you can't have someone else eat your vegetables for you. So that's why, even though the risk is higher in eating salads when you're pregnant, the benefits are so high of eating the fresh fruits and vegetables that they say, yeah, eat lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. Okay, so there's this cost benefit weighing that's going on here. Okay, ethics and risk. So in general, we allow people to decide for themselves if the risks are worth it to them. So if the benefits are worth the chances of a harm. So for example, you and many people do value the experience of skydiving and decide that the benefits are worth the risks. Okay, but ethical issues arise when we impose risks on others through public policy decisions. So when you build a new medical device, a bridge, a vehicle, an airplane, there are always trade-offs between risks, costs, and benefits, and this is when the ethics arises. So ethical issues arise when engineer politicians make these decisions for others and there's no informed consent or there are no other options. So, you put a bridge up and you decide on certain, trade-offs between costs, benefits, and risks, right? But it's not like the general public is going to go out and look up the plans and get the background knowledge in math and architecture and engineering to understand what they're getting into when they're crossing the bridge. So it would be hard to get people's informed consent about the bridge, and then there may be no other options if we're talking about things like, automobile transportation. The way that cities are laid out now, and the way our lives are arranged, it's hard to opt out of having a vehicle, like a car to drive around. Okay, or maybe air pollution or a dam that's built near your house, or other sort of non-ionizing radiation that might be around. Okay, uncertainty. All right, so people get really confused, understandably getting confused when we start talking about uncertainty. So uncertainty is when we are uncertain about potential harms. And this would mean that you don't know what the odds of the harm occurring to you are. Okay, so when you get certain vaccines, like the polio vaccine, there's a 1 in 1 million chance that your odds are very good. You're not going to die from this vaccine. Okay, right? But we're uncertain about something if you just have no idea what the odds are. The odds could be small or the odds could be large. And we don't have great vocabulary for talking about this, and I will maybe in my lectures accidentally switch into using the word risk when I'm talking about uncertainty. And I'll try to catch myself. So here's an example. If you choose to take a bet on an uncertain harm, it would be like agreeing to play Russian roulette, not knowing the number of the chambers in the gun or the number of the bullets in the gun. So there could be 1 million chambers and 1 bullet, or there could be 3 chambers and 1 bullet. You just don't know. That's what uncertainty is. So there's a new technology and you're really gambling. You don't know what the odds are of harm. So when public policy decisions are made without the information about the odds, right, is when ethical issues arise. But then it happens that sometimes we must act. So we had to act with COVID-19. COVID-19 was a great example of uncertainty. Scientists had no idea, especially early on, how the virus was going to spread, how it was going to mutate. We didn't even know how it was spread. They were closing playgrounds back in early 2020. Playgrounds were cordoned off. They just did not have understand the odds of spreading, the odds of death, and there's still a lot of things that we are uncertain about, but we still have to act. We still had to act on uncertain information. And this is when ethical issues arrive when we're making public policy decisions about this. Okay. And we'll talk more about this. We'll talk more. There's some guidelines about how to make public policy decisions when we are uncertain about harms. Okay. So when scientists, politicians, engineers, etc., mix up uncertainty and risk, people die. So there's a long history in science and engineering of mistakes being made when when you portray uncertainty, if you just don't know what the odds are of harm, you portray that as just a small risk. Understandably, that would cause some problems. And then portraying risk as uncertain. So you know what the risk is, but you say, well, we don't actually know. All right, so first, when you mix up uncertainty and call it a small risk. So if we don't know if some new chemical causes cancer, this does not mean that it is very unlikely to cause cancer. So this happens a lot. They'll say, oh, there's no information, there's no data showing that this causes cancer, therefore it's safe, right? That doesn't mean that that just doesn't follow. So absent evidence doesn't mean that if there's no evidence that something is harmful, doesn't mean the thing is not harmful. Okay, so this was a mistake. I think it's pretty clear that the engineers the engineers and scientists at NASA made with the Challenger explosion. The people in charge of the part that failed and caused the explosion were the engineers at Thiokol, and they were trying to say not to launch because their data was not clear about the safety of these secondary seals at the temperature at the time of the launch. So they said, we don't have reliable data. This is uncertain. And okay, so going back to Russian roulette, this is asking the people in the Challenger, going up in the Challenger, to play Russian roulette when you don't know how many bullets and how many chambers there are in the gun. So for all the engineers at Thiokol know is that there could be 1 bullet and 3 chambers, 1 bullet and 100 chambers, 1 bullet and 500 chambers. That's what uncertainty means. They did not know. But what the decision makers, they construed this uncertainty, not having data, with it being a small risk. So the decision makers took this uncertainty to mean that the risk was small. But obviously it was not small. And we'll talk more about the Challenger later. And even my students in class, some of my students didn't really get this as we were discussing the Challenger case when I had an on-ground class when we were talking in person. They were saying things like, well, when you go up into space on a spaceship, that's just risky. So, they should have taken the risk. They should have launched. They shouldn't have been sissies and halted the launch because nothing can be perfectly safe. But I think what those students were thinking was that uncertainty meant a small risk, right? And of course, going up into space involves risk, right? But in this case, we had no idea whether you're asking the astronauts to put a gun to their head with 1 bullet and 3 chambers, or 1 bullet and 10,000 chambers, or 1,000 chambers, 1 bullet and 1,000, right? So those are very different scenarios. Okay, and then there's there's another way to mix up risk and uncertainty. It's when you portray, the odds of something being harmful, but you call it uncertain. Oh, but we don't know. And usually this is a result of dishonesty. This up here often is a result of, critical thinking failure, misunderstanding, confusion, not really understanding the issue. This often is just greed and dishonesty. So in most cases. So for example, long after scientists understood the risks of smoking and cancer, which was a 30% chance of dying from cancer if you're a tobacco user, Big Tobacco dishonestly portrayed this known risk as an unknown. So they paid scientists, they funded research groups to come up with anything that would shed doubt on the established risk, to call it actually uncertain, saying that, oh, well, actually, we don't really know the cause of cancer. It could be some of the studies they published were people that have pet birds. It could be your pet bird. Legitimately, there was a study. High correlation found between pet birds and lung cancer. And this was published by the industry scientists that were being paid by the tobacco companies to shed doubt on smoking being the cause of cancer. And obviously, this did not allow people to make an informed choice about their tobacco habits. So that's why this would be immoral. Okay, so this is just a way to introduce you to the terminology and to the issues that are going to be discussed in this unit and will also come up further on down the line. So, mixing up risk uncertainty, portraying uncertainty as risk, individual decisions, making an individual decision about what you're going to do, leaving it up to the person whether they're going to take these risks or choices about uncertainties, or whether these are imposed on people through public policy, on which, and many of these, they can't really consent to. So this is just an introduction. I hope that you have found this helpful.